Scrambled Eggs Super by Dr. Seuss. I don't like to brag, and I don't like to boast, said Peter T. Hooper, but speaking of toast, and speaking of kitchens and ketchup and cake, and kettles and stoves and the stuff people bake, well, I don't like to brag, but I'm telling you, Liz, that speaking of cooks, I'm the best that there is. Why, only last Tuesday, when Mother was out, I really cooked something worth talking about. You see, I was sitting here resting my legs, and I happened to pick up a couple of eggs. And I sort of got thinking, it's sort of a shame that scrambled eggs always taste the same. And that's because ever since goodness knows when, they've always been made from the eggs of a hen. Just a plain common hen. What a dumb thing to use, with all of the other fine eggs you could choose. And so I decided that just for a change, I'd scramble a new kind of egg on the range. Some fancy fine eggs that no other cooks cook, like the eggs of a ruffle-necked Salamagook. The Salamagooks say that should be good, so I went out and found some as quick as I could. And while I was lugging them back to the house, I happened to notice a tibble-top grouse in a tree down the street, and I knew from her looks that her eggs and the eggs of the Salamagooks ought to mix mighty well, ought to taste simply super, when scrambled together by Peter T. Hooper. So I took those eggs home and I frizzled them up, and I added some sugar, 2/3 of a cup, and a small pinch of pepper, and also a pound of horseradish sauce that was sitting around, and also some nuts. And I tasted the stuff, and it tasted quite fine, but not quite fine enough. To make the best scramble that's ever been made, a cook has to hook the best eggs ever laid. So I drove to the country, quite rather far out, and I studied the birds that were flitting about. I looked with great care at the mop-noodled finch. I looked at the beagle-beaked bald-headed grinch, and also I looked at the shade-roosting quail, who was roosting right under a lassalax tail. I looked at a spritz and a flannel-winged jay, but I didn't just stop. I kept on my way, because they didn't have eggs. They weren't laying that day. Then suddenly, boy, up that hill a short space, birds, they were laying all over the place. Great happy gay families with uncles and cousins, all laying fine strictly fresh eggs by the dozens. Why, I'd have a scramble more super than super, scrambled eggs super de-duper de-booper, special deluxe a la Peter T. Hooper. I picked out the eggs in a most careful way. I picked only those that I knew were grade A. So I took only eggs from the very best fowls. So I didn't take eggs from the twiddler owls, 'cause I knew that the eggs of these fellows who twiddle taste sort of like dust from inside a bass fiddle. I went for the kind that were mellow and sweet, and the world's sweetest eggs are the eggs of the queet, which is due to those very sweet trout which they eat. And those trout, well, they're sweet 'cause they only eat wogs, and wogs, after all, are the world's sweetest frogs. And the reason they're sweet is whenever they lunch, it's always the world's sweetest bees that they munch. And the reason no bees can be sweeter than these, they only eat blossoms off beezelnut trees. And these beezelnut blossoms are sweeter than sweet. And that's why I nabbed several eggs from the queet. But I passed up the eggs of a bird called a strudel, who's sort of a stork, but with fur like a poodle. For they say that the eggs of this kind of stork are gluey like glue and stick to your fork. And the yolks of these eggs, I am told, taste like fleece, while the whites taste like very old bicycle grease. The places I hiked to, the roads that I rambled, to find the best eggs that have ever been scrambled. I hunted new birds along wild tangled trails, through gullies and gulches, down dingles and dales. I wriggled my way and I crawled at a creep through a forest of ferns that was 40 miles deep. And I mushed through the brush till I found a fine quigger whose eggs are as big as a pinhead, no bigger. Then I went for the eggs of a long-legged quag. Now this quag, well, she's built a little bit wrong. Her legs are so terribly, terribly long that she has to lay eggs 20 feet in the air, and they drop with a plop to the ground from up there. So unless you can catch them before the eggs crash, you haven't got eggs, you've got long leg or hash. eggs! I'd collected 302. But I still needed more, and I suddenly knew that the job was too big for one fellow to do. So I telegraphed north to some friends near Fazol, which is 10 miles or so just beyond the North Pole, and they all of them jumped into their catamastride, which is sort of a boat made of sea leopard's hide, which they sailed out to sea to go looking for grice, which is sort of a bird which lays eggs on the ice, which they grabbed with a tool which is known as a squish, because those eggs are too cold to be touched without which. And while they were sending those eggs, I got word of a bird who does something that's almost unheard of. It's hard to believe that this bird that's called the pelf lays eggs that are 3 times as big as herself. How that pelf ever learned such a difficult trick, I never found out, but I found that egg quick, and they managed to get it down out of the nest and home to the kitchen along with the rest. But I didn't stop then, because I knew of some ducks by the name of the single file Zimmerman Zucks, who stroll single file through the mountains of Zums, quite oddly enough, with their eggs on their thumbs. And some fellows in Zums, whom I happen to know, just happened to capture 1,000 or so, and they wrapped up their eggs and they mailed them by air. Marked special delivery, handle with care. I needed more helpers, and so for assistance I called up a fellow named Allie, long distance. And Allie, as soon as he hung up the phone, picked up a small basket and started alone to climb the steep crags and the jags of Mount Struku to fetch me the egg of a Mount Struku cuckoo. Now these Mount Struku cuckoos are rather small gals. But these Mount Struku cuckoos have lots of big pals. They dive from the skies with wild cackling shrieks, and they jabbed at his legs and they stabbed at his cheeks. And their yammering, clamoring, hammering beaks. But brave Allie, he fought his way through, and he sent me that egg as I knew he would do. For my Scrambled Eggs Super, de-duper, de-booper, special deluxe, a la Peter T. Hooper. In the meanwhile, of course, I was keeping real busy, collecting the eggs of a 3-eyelashed tizzy. They're quite hard to reach, so I wrote on the top of a hammocker, schnimmaker, schnemmaker, schnupp. Then I found a great flock of southwest-facing cranes, and I guess they've got something wrong with their brains. For this kind of crane, when she's guarding her nest, will always stand precisely facing exactly southwest. So to get to those eggs wasn't hard in the least. I came from behind, from precisely northeast. And I captured the egg of a griggly gractus who lays them up high in a prickly cactus. Then I went for some ziffs. They're exactly like zuffs, but ziffs live on cliffs and zuffs live on bluffs. And seeing how bluffs are exactly like cliffs, it's mighty hard telling the zuffs from the ziffs, but I know that the egg that I got from the bluffs if it wasn't a ziffs from the cliffs, was a zuffs. Now I needed the egg of a moth-watching sneff, who's a bird who's so big she scares people to death. And this awful big bird, well, the reason they name her the moth-watching sneff is because that's how they tame her. She likes watching moths. It sort of quiets her mind. And while she is watching, you sneak up behind and you yank out her egg. So I got one, of course, with the help of some friends and a very fast horse. If you want to get eggs you can't buy at the store, you've got to do things never thought of before. Why, to get the egg out of one very small dwarf, we had to pry off one whole mountain top off. Then I heard of some birds who lay eggs, if you please, that taste like the air in the holes of Swiss cheese, and they live in the big Zanzibar trees. So I ordered a treeful. The job was immense, but I needed those eggs. I said, hang the expense. I still needed one more, and I saved it for last, the egg of the frightful, bombastic aghast. That bird is so mean and that bird is so fast that I had to escape on a jillicajast, a fleet-footed beast who can run like a deer, but looks sort of different. You steer him by ear. All through with the searching, all through with the looking. I had all I needed, and now for the cooking. I rushed to the kitchen, the place where I'd stacked 'em. I rolled up my sleeves, I unpacked 'em and cracked 'em, and shucked 'em and chucked 'em in 99 pans. Then I mixed in some beans, I used 55 cans. Then I mixed in some ginger, 9 prunes and 3 figs, and parsley, quite sparsely, just 22 sprigs. Then I added 6 cinnamon sticks and a clove, and my scramble was ready to go on the stove. And do you know how they tasted? They tasted just like, well, they tasted exactly just like Scrambled Eggs Super de-duper de-booper, special deluxe, a la Peter T. Hooper. The end.